The Arizona sun hung high in the sky, bright and sharp as a blade. The air shimmered with heat, and every sound, a buzzing fly, a shifting pebble, seemed louder than usual. Dust covered everything, even the heart of Jed Carter, a cowboy who had been riding alone for 3 days. His horse, an old gray mare named Luna, moved slowly, her sides rising and falling with every tired breath. Jed had lost his cattle after a wild dust storm swept through the plains 2 nights ago. The storm came out of nowhere, twisting wind, flying grit, and darkness so thick a man could barely see his own hands. When it was over, his herd had scattered, his water skin was nearly empty, and his sense of direction had gone with the wind. Now, as he followed a narrow path down into Dry Creek Canyon, Jed hoped he might find a bit of water. The land there was still and quiet except for the sound of crickets and the occasional distant call of a hawk. He dismounted, his boots crunching on the dry earth, and looked around. The creek had long ago turned into a trickle, but a small pool of muddy water still glimmered under a fallen tree. "Not much, but it'll do," Jed murmured, patting Luna's neck. He led her down to drink, then sat on a flat rock and wiped his forehead with his sleeve. Up in the cliffs, someone else was watching. Nash Doiba, an Apache woman of about 20, crouched among the rocks. She had been gathering herbs and roots that her people used for medicine. Her sharp eyes had caught sight of the cowboy long before he noticed anything around him. From his hat, his worn boots, and the long rifle strapped to his saddle, she could tell he was not one of her people. The Apache had learned to be careful. White men often came too close, cutting down trees, hunting game, or chasing cattle across their sacred ground. But this one seemed different. He looked tired, almost lost. Still, she stayed hidden, watching quietly. Jed bent over the water, dipping his canteen to fill it. That was when he heard it, a faint, dry sound, like beads being shaken in a small drum. He froze. The sound came again, sharper this time, rattle, rattle, rattle. He slowly turned his head. Not 2 feet away, a rattlesnake slid from a pile of rocks, its scales shining in the sun like polished brass. Its tongue flicked in and out, testing the air. Jed's whole body went stiff. He knew better than to move too fast. The snake, curious or cautious, slithered closer and closer, until it slid right between his boots. Jed didn't even breathe. The snake lifted its head slightly, tasting the sweat and dust in the air, then stopped right there, between his legs. From up on the ridge, Nash Doiba's eyes widened. She couldn't see the snake clearly at first. All she saw was the cowboy standing frozen in the strangest position, looking as if he had lost all sense. Her lips pressed together, trying not to laugh, but curiosity got the better of her. Then she saw it, the rattlesnake, coiled right under him. Her heart jumped. Without thinking, she leapt from behind the rocks and shouted in her clear, strong voice, "Cowboy, why do you have a rattlesnake between your legs?" Jed blinked. For a second, he thought the heat had made him hear things. Then he saw her, a woman with long black hair and bright eyes, standing not far away with a bundle of herbs in her hands. The sudden shout startled him. He flinched just slightly, but that was enough. The snake hissed, gave one last rattle, and darted off toward the bushes. Jed stumbled back, nearly falling, his hat tipping over his eyes. He looked down at his leg, half expecting to see the worst, but there was only a small scratch. The fang had grazed him, but not deep. Still, his skin burned and his heart pounded like a drum. He looked up again at the woman. She stood watching him, half worried, half amused. "Well," Jed said, trying to catch his breath, "that wasn't exactly how I planned to meet someone today." Nash Doiba tilted her head. She didn't understand every word, but his tone made her smile. She stepped closer, pointing to his leg. "Snake bite?" she asked carefully. "Think it just nicked me," Jed said, wincing. "Hurts like the devil, though." She frowned at the strange word, but knelt beside him anyway. From her pouch, she took out a small wooden bowl and a handful of green leaves. Crushing them between 2 stones, she made a soft paste and pressed it gently against his leg. The coolness of the herbs soothed the sting. Jed watched her work in silence. Her movements were quick but calm, like someone who had done this many times. The smell of the crushed plants was strong, sharp, earthy, a little sweet. "Thank you, ma'am," he said softly. She looked up at him, her dark eyes steady. "No move, rest," she said. Her English was broken, but her meaning was clear. Jed nodded and leaned back against a rock. The sun had dropped lower now, throwing long shadows across the canyon floor. Luna stood nearby, flicking her tail lazily. Everything felt strangely peaceful. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Jed could hear the quiet hum of the desert, the rustle of grass, the chirp of a lizard, the soft whisper of wind through the canyon. Every now and then, Nashtoiba hummed under her breath, a tune that rose and fell like the rhythm of the earth itself. He didn't understand the words, but something about it comforted him. As the light began to fade, Jed's eyelids grew heavy. His leg throbbed, but the pain was duller now. He thought about the strange day, how he'd nearly been bitten, and how this woman had appeared out of nowhere to help him. He smiled faintly. "You saved me," he whispered. Nashtoiba looked at him, puzzled. He repeated the words slowly, tapping his chest, then pointing at her. "You saved me," she seemed to understand. Her lips curved into a small smile. "Snake, go," she said. "You live." "Guess I owe that snake for not finishing the job," Jed said weakly, and she gave a soft laugh, a sound like the trickle of water in the rocks. Night fell over the canyon. Nashtoiba built a small fire and placed a blanket beside it for him to rest. She offered him a drink from a leather pouch, cool, bitter-tasting tea made from the same herb she'd used on his wound. Jed drank gratefully. The stars came out bright and clear above the desert. The fire crackled softly between them. Jed dozed on and off through the night, drifting in dreams where the sound of the rattlesnake mixed with Nashtoiba's gentle humming. Sometimes he thought he heard her speaking to someone, perhaps to the spirits asking them to let him live. By morning, the worst of the fever had passed. When he opened his eyes, the sun was just touching the cliffs, painting them gold. Nashtoiba was kneeling beside the fire, stirring a small pot. She noticed him awake and gave a short nod. "Eat," she said simply, handing him a bowl of warm broth. He ate slowly, smiling between sips. "You know," he said, "I reckon I'll have quite the story to tell if I ever get back to town." She didn't understand the words, but she saw the light in his eyes and smiled back. For a brief moment, the world felt quiet and right. Two strangers from different worlds sharing the same sun, the same fire, the same breath of morning air. When Jed finally stood to leave, he looked down at the small patch on his leg where the herb still clung. The bite mark was barely visible. He looked at Nashtoiba and touched his hat politely. "Thank you," he said again, hoping she understood. She nodded once more. "Go, no snake," she said, her tone half serious. Half teasing, Jed chuckled and mounted Luna. "I'll try my best." As he rode away from Dry Creek, he glanced back once and saw her standing near the fire, watching him go. The morning light caught her hair, turning it to gold. He didn't know her name, her story, or why she had helped him, but he knew one thing for sure. He'd never forget the day an Apache woman shouted at him about a rattlesnake, and how that moment, wild and strange, had saved his life. And somewhere in the still air of the canyon, as Luna trotted into the distance, he thought he heard a faint sound, rattle, 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 followed by the echo of a woman's laughter carried by the wind. The morning sun climbed over the red cliffs, warming the desert sands. Jed Carter rode slowly, his legs still sore but feeling stronger. His mind, however, was full of thoughts. Every few minutes he glanced back toward the canyon where he had left the Apache woman. He didn't even know her name, yet her face and her calm eyes stayed in his memory like a photograph burned by the sun. He wanted to thank her properly, but he didn't know how. He didn't speak her language and she didn't speak much of his, but there was something about the way she looked at him. Not as an enemy, not even as a stranger, but as a human being. That was something rare in those days. By noon, Jed's strength began to fade again. His leg throbbed and the heat pressed down heavy. He tried to keep riding, but soon the desert began to spin around him. He slipped from his horse and hit the ground softly, the world turning white. When he opened his eyes again, the sky had changed color. It was late afternoon and he was lying under shade made from woven branches. He blinked, trying to focus. Shapes moved around him. Quiet figures, voices speaking a language he couldn't understand. Then he saw her. The Apache woman. She was kneeling beside him, pressing a cool cloth on his forehead. Her expression was calm but serious. When she saw his eyes open, she smiled a little and said, "You wake?" Jed tried to sit up, but she shook her head. "Rest," she said. He looked around and realized he was inside a small camp. Smoke rose from a cooking fire nearby. A few children watched him from a distance, their eyes wide with curiosity. Several older men stood talking quietly, their faces unreadable. Jed swallowed hard. He had heard many stories about what might happen to a cowboy caught in Apache territory, but this didn't feel like a trap. It felt cautious, yes, but not cruel. After a while, one of the men came over. He was tall, with strong arms and a necklace made of small animal teeth. The woman said something to him in Apache and he nodded, studying Jed carefully. Then he spoke a few slow words in English. "You rest. Safe here, I am Taza." Jed nodded gratefully. "Thank you, sir. I owe you and your sister my life." Taza tilted his head, unsure of every word, but he seemed to understand the meaning. He gave a small smile and walked away. That evening, Jed was given a bowl of stew and a blanket. The fire crackled softly and the night air was cool and clean. Nashtoiba, he finally learned that was the woman's name, sat near the fire humming the same song he had heard before. It had no words he knew, but its rhythm felt like the heartbeat of the desert. Days passed slowly. Jed's wound healed little by little under Nashtoiba's care. He watched her as she worked, grinding herbs, helping the elders, teaching children to weave baskets. She moved with quiet purpose, like someone who belonged to every part of the land. He began to pick up a few Apache words. She taught him the names of things. Tu for water, Goway for coffee, Ashki for boy. In return, he taught her simple English words: son, horse, friend. Sometimes they laughed at each other's pronunciation, but somehow they understood more than they said. One evening, when the sky turned orange and purple, Jed sat by the fire carving a small piece of wood with his pocket knife. Nashtoiba came over and watched quietly. After a while, she asked, "What make?" Jed smiled. "A gift," he said. He held it up. It was a tiny wooden rattle shaped like the one that had nearly cost him his life. When he shook it gently, it made a soft sound. Her eyes widened with delight. "Snake sound," she said with a grin. "Exactly," Jed laughed. "But a friendly one this time." She took it carefully, holding it as if it were made of gold. "Good," she said softly. "You remember? That night the whole camp gathered around the fire. Stories were told in the Apache tongue. Stories of spirits, mountains, and brave ancestors. Though Jed didn't understand the words, he felt the emotion behind them. When it was his turn, he told them in slow, simple English about the time he lost his cattle in a dust storm and found something far more valuable than a herd: kindness. Nashtoiba translated the best she could, and the people listened. Some laughed at the part where she had shouted at him about the rattlesnake. Even Taza smiled. For the first time in a long while, Jed felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. He felt like he belonged, even if only for a moment, in a place where people lived close to the earth, guided by its rhythm. But the peace did not last forever. One morning, a scout returned to the camp with news. Soldiers had been seen nearby, searching for a missing cowboy. Jed knew immediately they were looking for him. The thought made his heart heavy. That night, he went to Taza and Nashtoiba. "I can't stay," he said quietly. "If the soldiers find this place, it could cause trouble for you." Taza looked at him seriously. "You go," he said. "We show you path." "You say nothing," Jed nodded. "I promise. I'll tell them nothing about this place." Before dawn, Nashtoiba gave him a small bundle: dried food, a pouch of herbs, and the wooden rattle he had carved. She placed it in his hand. "You remember," she said again, touching her heart. He swallowed hard, trying to find the right words. "I'll never forget," he said softly. "You saved my life twice, and once from the snake, and once from myself." She smiled faintly, not understanding every word, but feeling the truth behind them. As the sun rose, Jed rode away, guided by Taza through narrow trails until they reached the edge of the territory. They parted with a firm handshake, a sign of respect between two men from different worlds. When Jed finally reached the nearest outpost, the soldiers were surprised to see him alive. "We thought you were done for," one of them said. "What happened out there?" Jed just smiled and shook his head. "You wouldn't believe me if I told you," he said. The captain insisted on knowing more. Jed paused, then said with a grin, "Let's just say I was saved by a ghost and a snake." The men laughed, thinking it was a joke. Jed didn't correct them. Some things were better left as stories the desert could keep. Weeks later, when he finally returned to town, People often asked him about the scar on his leg. He'd touch it lightly and say, "It's from a lesson the desert taught me. Stay still when you're scared and listen to the voices that come out of nowhere. They might just save you." But in quiet moments, when he sat under the stars, he would take out the small wooden rattle and shake it gently. The sound would carry on the wind, soft and familiar. In his mind, he could still see Nashdoiba standing by the fire, her hair shining in the starlight, her laughter blending with the whisper of the canyon. He never saw her again, but he often rode near Dry Creek, leaving small gifts, a carving, a shell, a piece of cloth, on a rock where the rattlesnake had once coiled. It was his way of saying thank you. Across the distance, across time, sometimes, travelers who passed through that place would swear they heard laughter echoing through the cliffs, like a memory that refused to fade. They would look around, puzzled, and say, "The desert's talking again." Jed knew better. It wasn't the desert. It was the spirit of kindness that lived there. The spirit of an Apache woman who once saved a cowboy and taught him that not all strangers are enemies, and not all danger is meant to harm. Years later, long after Jed's hair had turned gray, people still told the story of the cowboy who had a rattlesnake between his legs and lived to laugh about it. Some said it was a tall tale. Others said it really happened, but Jed never argued. He just smiled and said, "Believe what you want. All I know is sometimes a shout, a snake, and a stranger can change a man's whole life." And as the desert wind blew softly through the sage and sand, somewhere out there, the faint sound of a wooden rattle still echoed, a reminder of that wild, funny, and unforgettable moment when two worlds met under the blazing sun of the Old West.